Despite trying so hard to stay true to the books, the series Lockwood and Co added and dropped 10 significant things. The show is based on the first 2 books in the series by Jonathan Stroud, The Screaming Staircase and The Whispering Skull, and they are about how Lucy finds herself in Lockwood and Co as a super talented listener. Then the 2 biggest rivals in the series, the Kipps crew and Lockwood and Co, are always seen hating each other and competing on who's best in the haunting ghost job. And while these 2 groups constantly challenge themselves in their careers, they did fight it out in the books, but sadly, this didn't make it to the show. The show's scriptwriter and director Joe Cornish mentioned how this fight that every viewer had loved to have seen didn't make it to the series, and the reason is interesting. In the books, the challenge happened right after the Screaming Staircase job, and there was a big time jump of about 7 months in the books before the trio got to the cemetery case. But the series never mentioned this time jump, and the job they were called to do was about containing the ghost of a former criminal haunting a preschool. And while at it, George, Lockwood and Lucy became faced with a lot more. According to Joe, this part of the books involves George and Lockwood going out without Lucy to fight spectres that are the most common Type 2 ghosts. But unfortunately, they lose to the Kipps crew, who even end up saving their lives. In an interview, he said,
"It was just a massive set piece that didn't actually advance the story. So we just had to, and we didn't sort of have the time or money for it. So having said that, we've had the time and money for absolutely every other set piece in the books. But that one we didn't get to do. Instead, the characters come in and sort of talk about it."
So yeah, this particular challenge didn't make it to the show because of budget. So instead, viewers heard George and Lockwood discuss it in the show. The part where Lockwood comes home furious with George explaining to Lucy what has happened is the alternative to seeing the real stuff happening. However, Joe added that if the series had been 20 episodes long with a budget of £20 million on each episode, then everything could have made it to the show, including this challenge, because it would have been so exciting to see Lockwood's face as he loses on the spot to Kipps's crew. Lovers of the books would immediately notice the difference between George's character in the books from the one in the show. The character in the books is British and goes by the name George Cubbins, but the show's character has another nationality. During the audition process for this character, the casting director discovered that Ali Haji Hashmati fits perfectly to portray George. However, Ali is British Iranian, which is different from the identity of the book's character. The character had to be adjusted so that Ali could fit in perfectly to play the role. So with the help of the book's author and Ali, they created the surname Karim, and it's good that Ali got to do the role because he was very good at portraying George. After fans got introduced to Lockwood and his associate Lucy, the series jumped back a bit to show how Lucy got to start working with Lockwood, and her past is painful to look back on. But while the books may have mentioned how Lucy's former supervisor Jacobs caused many of his young workers to pass away and suffer, leaving Lucy to bear the blame, the show may have also exaggerated some of Lucy's part. Most of the things in the series that Lucy went through before getting to Lockwood didn't happen, but were created to make the series more fun and interesting for the viewers. The first house that Lockwood and Lucy visited together in the show gave them their first real crime case that involved a ring. In the scene, Lockwood and Lucy discovered that the visitor haunting the house was Annabelle Ward, a celebrity who passed away many years ago and still had her case unresolved by the DEPRAC, the Department of Physical Research and Control that the government sets up to tackle the problem of visitors. In the course of containing the ghost, they came across her body between the walls and discovered that someone had put her there to cover up the crime. However, Lucy saw a ring in the girl's hand, which could be the source, and she took it before they fled the house while mistakenly burning it to the ground. But in the books, it wasn't a ring, but a necklace that Lucy snatched from the girl's body. This ring caused a lot of issues later on in the show, but it must have been replaced with the necklace from the books because they needed to make that scene as quick as possible. If it were a necklace in the show, Lucy would have had difficulty removing it from the ghost's body without Lockwood noticing and without the fire catching up with them in the house. But with a ring, it wasn't detected by Lockwood as Lucy quickly grabbed it. The case involving a ring in the show got the trio in serious trouble because they burned down the house they were meant to keep visitors free, and the DEPRAC refused to cover up the loss, so the 3 of them got into massive debt to pay the fine of £60,000 within 2 weeks. The penalty was a lot for a small agency, and the notice was also too short. Although they were also given a short deadline in the books, it's still longer than the 2 weeks deadline they got in the show. In the books, the trio had a month to pay off their fine, while it was 2 weeks in the series. Before the 3 of them realized that John Fairfax had set them up, someone attacked their house to look for the ring, and Lockwood made sure he stabbed the person even though their face was covered. Also, when they were getting picked up to go to the Coombe Kerry Hall, Fairfax's haunted house where he wants Lockwood, Lucy and George to clear off visitors in exchange for paying their fine, they noticed Fairfax's assistant, Ellie, was in pain from a wound wound. When asked, she mentioned it was pain from an old war wound because she used to be an agent. However, Lockwood and his associates later put it together to know that Ellie was the one who broke into their home to look for the ring. The difference here is that in the books, a man was the one who broke into their home, and who also doubles as Fairfax's assistant, and not a woman, so Ellie as a character changed from the real one in the books. Shortly after this encounter with Fairfax, they also got another job at the cemetery, where they needed to make the grave safe so other workers could do their job. But then, after they secured the ghost, George and one of their employers, Pamela Joplin, opened up the net that secured the visitor in the grave to take a better look at the mirror that the body was holding in the grave. And this moment made the ghost escape, leaving George too stunned to move. However, Lucy attacked the ghost with her dagger, and Lockwood screamed at George, who covered the grave with his net. But then this scene is slightly different from the books, because in the books, George couldn't do anything as he stood frozen, and it was Lucy who ended up covering the grave with the net, not George. This mirror that got George too scared to move was later stolen, and Deprat gave Kipps's crew and Lockwood and Co. the rights to find whoever did it. While explaining how the robbery happened, they mentioned that the children guarding the place were knocked out and couldn't see the robbers. But that's not true, according to the books. In the books, one child guard identified the relic thief as Jack Carver, who is different from how Lockwood discovered his name. It was Flo Bones who revealed who Jack Carver was to Lockwood in the series, but even though Flo helped, this little detail came from somewhere other than her in the books. After Lockwood and Lucy go through the trouble of recovering the stolen relic mirror, they hand it over to George and Flo, while trusting them to deliver it to DEPRAC, who will destroy it. But George had other plans, as he couldn't go through with their arrangement or go to the house, so he called and went and met his new trusted friend Joplin. While this part of the show might be almost accurate, George didn't go and meet Joplin. Instead, George goes home with the mirror because he is obsessed, and Joplin comes to meet him and takes him away from the house to the cemetery to achieve the evil things she planned on doing. Also, when Lucy asks the skull in the jar if he knows anything about where George took the mirror, the skull only replies that George found another friend because they were too busy to notice him. But in the books, the skull was clear when he mentioned that Joplin left home with George and the mirror. After Joplin takes George to the cemetery, an unexpected visitor, Kipps himself, is also there. Kipps had seen George and Pamela as they were entering the cemetery, and he followed them. But Pamela was able to get a quick hold of the intruder, Kipps, by keeping him in handcuffs, as he wasn't part of her plan for the night. And that was where George started to suspect Pamela. Still, the surprising difference between the books and the show here is that Pamela Joplin has quite the strength to bind Kipps and George and the other agents that came in later, like Lucy, but that's because the role was initially meant to be played by a man. According to the books, the original character was Albert Joplin, so Albert was replaced by Pamela for the show, but their roles were still the same, as they were both evil. The only difference is the name change and the switch from a man to a woman. So, what do you think about these differences between the Lockwood & Co books and the show? Share your thoughts in the comment section below, and thanks for watching.